Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for staying. And as I told you last week, that I had to come back because the story had only just begun. Even with 2 shows, I don't think I can still exhaust it, but at least I've tried my best. And in the life, one must try. And this whole success story dates back to 1913. Now, Albert, later Sir Albert Kidston, had been appointed by the Colonial Office to establish a new department with the purpose of discovering what mineral wealth, in addition to gold, lay concealed beneath the forest and mountain tops of the still little known interior of the Gold Coast. The story goes on to say on April 24th, 1915, he was engaged on a rapid canoe voyage down the Volta as part of the countrywide survey. I noticed on entering a narrow gorge below Agena, he recorded that it was an ideal place for a dam. At the time, there was no opportunity to make measurements, but during the geological traverse made along the Volta, this place, Akosombo, 2.5 miles below Agena, was examined hurriedly, and the measurement made of the river at about half a mile above the gorge. Thank you very much again. Let me say, my visit here to Uncle Erasmus, I have had some history, and I don't think you can get these books from anywhere, so I'm soaking it up. So when you see me, with all this wisdom, don't ask me why. There's another book here, the Volta Resettlement Experience. Amazing. And this book is by James Maxing. It's called Volta, Man's Greatest Lake, the story of Ghana's Akosombo Dam. Uncle, thank you very much again. Last week we ended with you at the Volta desk of the development agency and then setting up the Volta Commission.
It was at the Development Commission.
Commission.
To which I was assigned, and I was given responsibility for the Volta desk. Now, as work was progressing, the Volta desk was expanded to be the Volta River Project Secretariat. What it really meant was that I took my staff and my files, moved a few blocks into another building where the secretariat was established, and 2 permanent secretaries, Major Milton and Herbert Winful, were appointed to be joint permanent secretaries for the secretariat. That was the first time that 2 permanent secretaries were appointed to take charge of an institution, of an office. It just shows the importance which the government of the day, Kwame Nkrumah, gave to the Volta project. I was the most senior, next to the 2 permanent secretaries. And at the Volta Secretariat, we prepared the Kaiser studies had been completed when I was in the Volta in the Development Commission. At that time, the decision had been made to build the Akosombo Dam instead of the Agena Dam, which had been designed, estimated, and preparations made by the British much earlier, but that dam could not be implemented because the investment funds had not been assembled. We had not identified buyers of the electricity which would generate the funds to pay for the investment. And so this was when the Americans came in, and it was the Americans who, it was the American president who, in consultation with Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, identified Kaiser engineers to review the work of the British engineers. And the result of that was the selection of Akosombo on technical grounds. And even at that point, it wasn't known that that we would be able to assemble the resources for Akosombo. But the decision was made to go on to Akosombo. So the site at Akosombo was being prepared, and tender documents were prepared, advertised. We had advertised these tender documents. Approaches had been made to various financiers at the same time as the aluminum companies were being approached to invest in the project. And the project was to mine bauxite, build an alumina plant, develop an aluminium smelter, which would then buy electricity. So negotiations were still going on when the part of the arrangements was to set up a Volta River Authority. Out of all these, a Volta River Authority Act was drafted, presented to Parliament, and it was after, and then we had also searched round for possible chief executive of the authority. The structure of the institution had been discussed and put together, passed through various, through a committee, a Volta committee. There was this Volta committee, also cabinet committee on the Volta, chaired by Kwame Nkrumah. You had people like Bedema Botsio, Ayakumi. They were on Kwame Nkrumah's cabinet committee on the Volta, and the secretariat worked to that committee. Incidentally, both the Volta Secretariat and, when the Volta Commission, when the Volta Secretariat was created out of the Volta Commission, Sir Robert Jackson, who had carried out a preparatory commission much earlier, was in charge of both the Volta Secretariat as well as the Development Secretariat. I'm mentioning the word Secretariat as different from Commission. Sir Robert Jackson was also on the cabinet committee, advising on the cabinet committee. So that's the structure which approved all the steps we took and presented the draft of the Volta Act to Parliament. And when the Volta Act was passed, Act 46 was passed, as soon as it was signed, then the authority had been created. By that time, Frank Dobson
had Bedema not been sacked from that restaurant, would history have taken a different turn?
Well, they were searching very, very avidly for
funds.
For not only funds. You needed a market.
Okay.
I mean, for anyone to invest in such a huge project, you needed a market for a product.
Yeah.
And the negotiations were very complex. And that Bedema incident happened to have been
a blessing in disguise?
Exactly. You see, he took advantage to sell his product, the area of his interest, the area of Ghana's interest.
For our young viewers who don't know why the Bedema issue came in, Bedema was Minister for Finance then, or Secretary for Finance?
Yeah, he was, I think, I'm not sure whether he was finance, but I think he was Minister for, or Secretary for Commerce or something.
And he traveled to America, goes into a restaurant to get served, and he was told that black people are not to be served in this restaurant, so step out. Being a government representative, it got to the wind of the American president, who was quite embarrassing that a minister for another country has been sacked from his restaurant. And when he got the opportunity to apologize to Bedema sold the idea that, listen, in any case, I'm here, I'm looking for money to go and build a dam.
Yeah, so President Eisenhower called his deputy, his vice president, Nixon, to that breakfast he held for Bedema. And it was then that the American president instructed his vice president to make sure that the project was looked at seriously. And it was at that meeting also that they decided that an American company could come in. Actually, Bedema reported back to Nkrumah, who then established a direct relationship with Kwame Nkrumah, with...
ignore them.
Oh, sorry.
Don't mind them.
That's right. Kwame Nkrumah, Bedema reported to Kwame Nkrumah, who then established a direct relationship with President Eisenhower. And out of all that, it was suggested that Kaiser should review all the studies. A lot of studies had taken place earlier. And Kaiser's contribution, major contribution, was to shorten, to try to reduce the overall cost of the project as then estimated. And when that was done, Nkrumah then asked Kaiser to try and put together a consortium of companies to invest in the project, the costs of which had been brought down. And that's how Kaiser became consultants and to the project. But by then, we had already advertised and taken the bids. They were, of course, analyzed and decisions made. Improgilo was appointed, and advertisements took place again for the various equipment which went into the project. That's it.
Now, at this beginning stages, I know the story is very long, so I'll try and truncate it. But did you anticipate, the magnitude of it then?
I must say personally that I had no idea that it would be as big a project. But I remember the chief executive who came from Canada, nominated by the Canadian government. It was who, before he left Ghana, in a discussion, did say that we had no idea how big the institution would become. He said the Ontario Hydro, from where he was selected, was so big that they had a budget bigger than the budget of the province of Ontario, which owned Ontario Hydro itself. So he said the place would get so big as to surprise most everybody in Ghana. And so he said we had to handle it properly and carefully. Now, for Frank Dawson to be appointed, approaches were made to a number of countries to nominate possible chief executives. And whenever their CVs were brought, reviewed by us, sent to the the cabinet committees by Sir Robert Jackson, discussed. Out of all this, the Canadian nominee was the one selected. The others, incidentally, there was one from Brazil, which I remember was so expensive. What he asked for in money terms was more than double what Frank Dawson was eventually given. Now, I mention this because even at the point when Frank Dawson was appointed as chief executive, his salary or his service conditions were higher than that of the president himself.
Wow.
So that tells you something.
Let me take a break here, and then we'll come back. One of the issues I want to look at was that they were going to build a dam, which was going to flood 3% of Ghana's landmass. Within this landmass were 80,000 people, 14,000 homes. The logistics. You know our beliefs. People have their deities. There's the Krachidente, there's the Ajana Polo. Everybody's in there who have to be moved. I mean, who initially thought about it and how did they go about it? Don't go. Well, thank you very much for staying, and we are talking to the very, very honorable, and I'm very honored, as I've been keep saying all through the interview, Mr. Erasmus Kalitsi, who once upon a time chief executive of VRA. He birthed it, nursed it, was there all from the beginning, and he's still very much associated. I mean, he's only left, but it's still in him. So Kalitsi, you were responsible for resettlement. Somehow I don't envy you. I mean, How do you resettle 52 communities?
If there were 52 communities, it would have been easy.
I see.
We had about 740 locations.
Wow.
80,000 people in all. Now, we didn't see these numbers. We didn't know them. We knew that the designs had been made to raise the dam up to a certain level. 280-foot contour was the level we were working at that time. And the reservoir at that level was supposed to be about 3,275 square miles, 8,400 square kilometers, about 3% of the land space of Ghana. Now, today we can mention these numbers because they've become a reality. But at that time, all we knew was that there would be a large lake behind the dam at Akosombo. We were yet to determine in accurate manner what would be required. So we engaged as many surveyors as possible from the survey department to assist us in determining the boundaries of the lake, which would form because the lake had not formed at the time. We engaged people from the Department of Social Welfare and sent them out into the potential areas to identify the villages and also to count the people who would be affected. We sent some more, like say, agricultural staff into the fields together with the social welfare people to identify the fields where people, their farms, assign ownership to the farms, as well as the houses which were in the over 700 villages. And at the same time, we had to get estimates of what the value of the various properties would be. For this, we drew upon government's lands department. But all this was simply for us to get information. And within a very short time, it was quite clear that if we were to be able to gather all the information needed for planning, it would be impossible for us to keep within about 2.5 years left for the dam to be built up to the 280-foot, up to the level required. So we had to make some decisions about how to proceed, and we decided that we would build the beginnings of towns, and put into these towns the beginnings of houses for the people. Now, out of the studies, the social studies which were taking place, we were able to extract information on the various tribes, the various communities. We studied them, found out literacy level, their health levels, so that, and then their faith, their religious conditions, in other words, their worship, the fetishes in the villages, all this. Oh yes, all these had to be studied, and out of these, we tried, with the assistance of planners, to plan settlements for these people. It was an extremely difficult work, but we had the cooperation of various departments we drew upon, and the government itself assisted us. The University of Science and Technology, I think it was University of Science and Technology, I believe at that time, we drew upon their staff of planners, some sociologists, and many government departments also supported us. So that's it.
Would you have had
Even incidentally, when it came to evacuation, the armed forces supported us also.
Okay.
I remember my friend and colleague, Colonel Kokapia. He was in charge at that time of the field squadron, and he joined us. My friend, my colleague Amatefio, and I approached him, and he came to Akosombo in what they call some metal boats. He brought some soldiers. We were planning the actual evacuation by taking that boat, taking those boats and going upstream. And I remember when we got into the boat, Colonel Kokapia stretched his, unfurled his tall stretch and said, "Gentlemen, remember that as long as you are on these boats, you are under my command." We thought he was our friend, but as a soldier, immediately we got under his supervision on a boat in the water. He had to give us orders. And as we were going, we would hit the rocks like this, and he would shout and say, "Do this, do that." Of course, all of us had to put on life jackets. So we surveyed the river to see where there would be obstacles for us to plan how the evacuation of the people from some of the villages would be planned. And so we did. That was a rather scary, one of the most scary journeys we undertook, but that was for only a few of us who were the planners of the whole project. The Army, again, the Air Force supported us with helicopters before going into any of the helicopters, you would sign a piece of paper to absolve the armed forces from having responsibility in case anything happened to you. I don't think today they do that, but in those days. But we surveyed potential sites on helicopters, would land in on school football parks, and wherever we went, you would find, at that time, helicopters were not as common as they are today. And whenever we arrived on the scene, we would be met with heavy dust to start with, and a large crowd of people coming to see what was taking place. So we took a lot of risk on our own lives, but it wasn't. We had a job to do, and we just went in and did the job.
Were there communities who would say, look, community A, you're moving to plot B, and they will say no? Or communities that will say, listen, I want to move here, and then you will say, no, you can't move there?
Oh yes, we had a lot of that. And here again, staff withdrew from Department of Social Welfare, whom we sent into the field to survey the populations in the 8,400 square kilometers of land, with places which had no access roads and whatnot. And the people had to be convinced that something big would take place and that the water might get to them. I mean, they were located in areas where the water would be expected to get to them. So it would be desirable for them to move out. Of course, they did not believe this to start with, but the social welfare people who were acting like liaisons to us were going all the time. We were getting the reports until, well, some agreed, some accepted, others were recalcitrant. But anyway, one way or the other, we managed to move the people. But it wasn't easy, I can assure you.
So how do you contemplating moving like the Krachidente? That's a big deity for the people.
Well, the Krachidente, Krachi, incidentally, was a major commercial town with very fine buildings, modern buildings, schools, hospital, things like that.
All in the floodway.
And we flooded all these. But they also had one of the most powerful gods.
Let me
local.
Let me take a quick break here so I can get more details on the Krachidente and how it is that it was moved. Don't go away. Thank you very much for staying, and I'm still here with Mr. Erasmus Kalitsi. I'm sure by now you know him just as I've gotten to know him. So we're talking about Krachi. We flooded expensive houses, and now we have to move the great deity.
Yes, like we did for the various religious groups which had fetishes and whatnot. We went through the chiefs and the religious leaders, negotiated with them. Some of the fetishes were said to be mobile. In other words, you could move them. Some, they said you couldn't move. And so you had to consult them about what to do to enable us to get work done in the area, because we couldn't let the places of worship be covered with water without doing anything about it. Usually there are some, we spend a certain amount of money in paying, in buying a few services of traditional experts to perform certain ceremonies. We accepted these as necessary approaches to handling these matters. In the case of Krachidente, we went through the same process, and when the time came, the date Krachidente would actually move, it was not exactly broadcast, but it was known by a few people, and lights in the whole of the area were put out, and there was noise. We had noises in the air, and the story was that the Krachidente was moving, and we are told that the Krachidente got established in a new location on some hill in the Krachi area.
Wow.
The exact manner of moving, some people say it flew, but none of us ordinary mortals had the privilege of managing the removal of the Krachidente.
Wow.
But for others, where we had to spend a little bit of money for some cattle to be slaughtered, or for some drinks to be purchased and whatnot and distributed, we did things like that.
Wow.
So that's it.
Eventually you became deputy chief executive.
Yes, in Development Commission, that was, now my study was in economics. In Development Commission, where I was dealing with commercial, with economic financial work related to the Volta project. That's then when the authority was first formed. I worked in the same economic and financial chores. Then the chief executive decided that I had to be sent to organize resettlement. I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about that, because I knew as an old district commissioner that this would involve a lot of people and it would be very difficult. But he said, look, I'm the chief executive. The dam was being built by an Italian company called Impregilo. And they were in the process of completing the Kariba Dam. And he said the engineering supervision was being done by Kaiser engineers. And Kaiser engineers and Kaiser, the Kaiser company had also agreed at that time to gather aluminium companies together to invest in the smelter, which was supposed to buy the electricity. So Kaiser would make sure that the job would be supervised so strictly that it would be completed on time and within costs. Said the work which faced Ghana as a country was to ensure that the people to be moved, that they, would be moved out before the lake would have risen to a point where their lives would be in danger, the risks would be involved. And it said the external world, all they would be interested in was the newspapers saying that Ghana had, people were dying, floating on the waters. So he said, look, no work in that office was as important for him and for the country as the resettlement of the people involved. So get up, get off your seat immediately. I don't care what work you may be engaged in, because whatever you do, I'm the boss. You are working for me. And what is important for me is what I'm asking you to do. So get up, go to the end of the building. We had then gone into a new building. Take an office as big as mine. Take another one big and put a secretary, and take a secretary and put a secretary there in an office, and I give you a few days and come and discuss with me what strategy
You're going to use.
you would present for us to do this work. This was how I got into resettlement.
Wow.
I didn't want to do it, but I was ordered to do it.
Right. You always mention Kwafa Kutu II as being very helpful.
There were two, to start with, the chiefs helped us a lot in arranging with their people to support us, and the support would take the place of, we would take the form of getting the people to agree to be taken, for their land to be flooded. Of course, you don't need permission. Once the lake is rising, that's it. But the chiefs made sure that the people whose lands and lives we were interfering with would give consent, so that there would not be riots and things like that around. Secondly, the chiefs also made sure that where we were taking people to, that the owners of the land would support, would agree for us to bring people there. Nana Kwafa Akoto gave Akwamu land upon which Akosombo Dam has been built. And Akosombo Township was an Akwamu, has been established on Akwamu land. Between Nana Kwafa Akoto and Nene Azuma Tekole, they supported us in the development of the Akosombo area, because these two owned the land in those places, and it was their people, so they they influenced their people to cooperate with us. We received similar, but not the same level of cooperation from other chiefs. But I must say that, I must put on record that as far as I'm concerned, these two did extremely well. They helped us to achieve whatever it is which we have been able to achieve. This Nana Kwafakuto.
Eventually coming back as a chief executive, I know I've now have to truncate a lot of things. I haven't talked about Harvard, I haven't talked about UN and everything. It's not my fault you've done too much. But eventually coming back as chief executive, I mean, probably like coming home. You've lived it, breathed it.
Yeah. I returned to, now there was a time I went to work for the World Bank and the Commonwealth Secretariat. In the World Bank, I worked on water and electricity in West Africa. In West Africa, mainly Liberia, Sierra Leone, Senegal. For the Commonwealth Secretariat, I was assigned as Assistant Director of National Water Commission in Jamaica. I took leave of absence from VRA to do that. When I returned, I was made Managing Director of Electricity Company of Ghana. So I had another 4 odd years there also. And then I was appointed Chief Executive of the Volta River Authority, where I spent another 8.5 odd years, and finished off in 1998 when I was appointed Chairman of the VRA Board.
So you came straight from Chief Executive to the board?
Yes, to the board. And I was Chairman of the board for 3.5 years. Yeah. Now, the VRA board, under the Act, it was Kwame Nkrumah himself, it was the President of Ghana himself who was Chairman of the VRA board. Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the biggest honor I have received. to sit as Chairman of the board, which had been chaired by no less a person than Kwame Nkrumah, the father of the Volta project. I couldn't have asked for.
Did you know him personally?
Because I was working in the Development Commission, the Volta Secretariat, and the Volta River Authority. I knew him personally.
Wow. Wow.
I knew him personally. But I wasn't a friend as such.
Okay.
You know, in other words, I didn't go playing golf with him or anything like that. No.
But you met at
he was the boss, and we had meetings occasionally. You know, that was it.
Wow. I mean, I think this has been one of my honorable and best moments in terms of meetings and personalities.
No.
And I'm hoping to come back, hoping I can come back, because I haven't even touched on the ecology, what was being thought. I mean, if you're going to flood 3% of land mass, obviously there's wildlife, everything was going to change. But time won't allow me. But I think I've done, a bit of justice to the topic. And so thank you so much. But who knows? Maybe I may pop back in again to come and get inquisitive because we have all learned and known and studied things that otherwise wouldn't have known. So until I come to you next week with another personality, you know what? Have a brilliant, brilliant week. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you so much, Mr. Kalitsi.
Thank you also very much for coming to get a little story out of me. Where I sit at the moment, things do not flow out of my mind as easily as they did some time ago.
You're fine.
But
You're very fine, don't worry. So until next week, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you.